Hello, boys and girls. Hola, hola. Buenos días. Buenas tardes. Good morning. Good afternoon. Welcome back to Miss B's Audio Reads. I am Miss B. Excited to be here with you today. And I would love to read to you a book that I used to read to my kids when I taught elementary school. And it is about a brave little girl named Ruby Bridges. She's one of those people that I think about all the time because I can't imagine having been 6 years old and having to have done what she did. So I would love to read this book to you today. It is called The Story of Ruby Bridges, and it's written by Robert Coles, illustrated by George Ford. I love the illustrations in this book as well. This is a true story, and so we'll talk a little bit about it as we read it. Hi, Talia. Thank you for tuning in. I love you. So this is the story of Ruby Bridges. And it might be a little bit hard to understand for some of us because when we go to school, whether it's preschool or whether it's your elementary school, if you're in first, second, third, fourth, in college. When you go to school, you see people of different colors. Some of us are lighter skin, some of us are darker skin, and some of us are somewhere in the middle. And not that long ago, it wasn't mixed like that. And so that is where this story takes place, back when all of the light-skinned students, and you'll hear that being called white kids in this book, were going to one school, and the darker students, where you hear called black students, were going to a different school, and they didn't come together. They weren't integrated. So, and it was not that long ago. All right, so here we start with Ruby Bridges. Little 4-year-old Ruby. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. "We were very poor, Ruby said. "My daddy worked picking crops. We just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, so my daddy lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I was 4, I think." In 1957, the family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor. Her mother took care of the children during the day. After they were tucked in bed, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors in a bank. Every Sunday, the family went to church. "We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit," Ruby's mother said. "We wanted them to start feeling close to Him from the very start." At that time, black children and white children went to separate schools in New Orleans. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair. And it was against the nation's laws. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools. 3 of the girls were sent to McDonough 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to the 1st grade in William Frantz Elementary School. So the judge said that there were these 4 girls that were chosen, and they were going to go to the schools where they would be the only black girls there. And so here we find out what happened. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in an important event in American history. They went to church. "We sat there and prayed to God," Ruby's mother said, "that we'd all be strong and we'd have courage and we'd get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl and she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all the American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard. On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the France Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. So there were people that were angry that they were putting kids with different races, with different colors in the same school. And so they would sit outside the school and yell at little Ruby Bridges. So I think about how strange that must have been for her. There are some documentaries on Ruby Bridges, if you're interested, where she does talk about the experience. Every day, for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to the France school surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby walked slowly for the first few blocks. As Ruby approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed towards her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school. When Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite and she worked well at her desk, Mrs. Henry said. She enjoyed her time there. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I'd ever taught. So, Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, in an empty building. Sometimes I look at her and wonder how she did it, said Miss Henry. How she went by those mobs and sat all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if the girl was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she would gradually begin to wear down, or even decide that she no longer wanted to go to school. Then one morning something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did, watching Ruby walk toward the school. Suddenly Ruby stopped, right in front of the mob, right in front of the mob of howling and screaming people. She stood there facing all those men and women, and she seemed to be talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what Ruby could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to move along. They tried to hurry her into school, but Ruby wouldn't budge. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into school. Wonder what she was saying. When she went into the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Mrs. Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and that she was surprised when Ruby stopped to talk with the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. I didn't stop and talk with them, she said. Ruby, I saw you talking, Mrs. Henry said. I saw your lips moving. I wasn't talking, said Ruby. I was praying. I was praying for them. Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning, she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual. After she walked a few blocks, the crowd was behind her. Ruby said the prayer she repeated twice a day, before and after school. And this is what it said. Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say those bad things, they don't know what they are doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you. So later that year, I'll read to you the end part here. Later that year, 2 white boys joined Ruby at the Franz Elementary School. Their parents were tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house when they could have been in school and learning. The mob became very angry when the first white boys went back to school, but those boys were soon joined by other children. We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to take the law into their own hands, one parent said. It's time for us to fight for the side of the law and for our children's rights to go to school and get their education. They all did get their education. Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in 2nd grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools should be desegregated so that children of all races would be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to the Franz school. She graduated from it and then went on to graduate from high school. Ruby Bridges is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons who attend school within the New Orleans public school system. Now a successful businesswoman, she has created the Ruby Bridges Educational Foundation for the purpose of increasing parental involvement in schools. You can learn more about that at the Ruby Bridges Foundation. So I thought it was important to read this story because Miss Bridges is not very old. She has, I believe she's 65, 70 years old, so she's not very old. For some of you young people, might be about as old as your grandparents. So this story didn't take place that long ago. But the reason that we see more color and more diversity and why we have friends that are all different shades is because of brave people like Ruby Bridges and brave people like the Marshalls who helped protect her. And so as we continue to always learn and grow, it's important, like we talked last week about standing up for what you believe and working towards equal rights for all people, regardless of their color. And so I thought it would be cool to share a story of a little girl who's probably not much older or younger than you are, who stood up to that and stayed true to who she was, and how in time other people were able to sort of see that. And we still have a lot of work to do. So I hope that I have some brave 4, 5, 3-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds out there who are ready to help be brave and strong like Ruby Bridges. All right, boys and girls, that is the story of Ruby Bridges. Moms and dads, there's some great, I just was watching a documentary talking actually about one of the Marshalls that was there and how he felt being there, and how he felt like he was doing the right thing. And so it was important for him to be there to protect her. And then it also has interviews with Ruby Bridges. I want to thank you all for joining me today, Miss B's Audio Reads. I look forward to seeing you next week. Hasta luego.